name is this on? Do I need to turn it on? Hello? Is there a, what should I do? Holler? Hello? Can you hear me okay if I holler? Okay. Holler. Okay, good. Hi, my name is Becky Talent. My pronouns are she and hers, and I am a old white lady with a pink turtleneck on, and I want to welcome you to First Unitarian Church, where our mission is to explore the eternal, nurture community, and pursue the common good. We welcome you in your brokenness and in your wholeness. No matter who you have been, who you are, or who you are becoming, we greet you today with love. I'd like to extend a special welcome, I don't know if they can hear us, a special welcome to everyone who is watching us on YouTube. During the prelude, please introduce yourself in the comments and let us know where you're joining us from. If you're in OKC, what neighborhood are you in? And if you're elsewhere, what city are you joining us from? And now the prelude prepares us for worship. Sorry I had to yell at you.
Good morning. My name is Susan Bishop. I'm an older white woman. And today I am wearing the original New England Patriots sweatshirt. We light our chalice in Midtown Oklahoma City on land that was home to First Americans, including the Apache, Caddo, and the Wichita, on land that was taken from the Muskogee and Seminole and other removed and relocated peoples. We light the chalice as a symbol of our sacred time together. The burning chalice represents the light of reason and science, the warmth of loving community, and the cleansing heat of justice and the flame of hope. And today, as we light our chalice, we are also celebrating Elizabeth Mueller's 75th birthday.
Again, welcome. Buenos dias. I am Reverend Diana Davies, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a white woman in my 50s wearing a clerical robe and stole today. I know it's on many hearts, so I want to just let you know that later in the service, we will be lifting up the name of Tyree Nichols, the young man who was beaten to death by police officers in Memphis. We'll be lifting up his name in prayer. But for now, can we just take a moment in silence to center ourselves in this place and time? Today's service is offered in collaboration with First Unitarian's Racial Justice Team. A little bit of history. Back in the spring of 2020, the First Unitarian Board of Trustees heard concerns from congregants about one of our meeting rooms that was named after Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, of course, is a deeply complicated historical figure who bears an indelible imprint in our nation's history that is both inspiring and troubling. He spoke highly of Unitarianism, but never joined a Unitarian church. He was a great thinker, an innovator, a founding father, the president of the young United States, but he also owned over 600 enslaved people. He described slavery as moral depravity, and yet he personally prospered from the institution. He had multiple children with one enslaved woman, and yet refused to give her her freedom. So given all of this, the board supported further consideration of a name change for the meeting room. But then the pandemic came along, and the names of rooms in which we weren't even physically meeting dropped in priority. So last year, then, the Racial Justice Team sent out a survey to the entire congregation asking for nominations for a new room name. And we received responses from over a third of people who received the survey, which is a great response rate. That survey generated 33 unique name suggestions. And of these, a few names came up multiple times, and 5 names emerged of people who had a clear connection to Unitarian Universalism and/or Oklahoma, and who exemplified our larger faith's principles and purposes with their legacy of life accomplishments. We heard about one of these people a few weeks ago, local civil rights leader and luminary Clara Luper. And today we'll hear about 4 more: Reverend Theodore Parker, Reverend Dr. Sophia Lyon-Foz, Reverend James Reed, and Reverend Fern Cowan-Stanley. We lift up the stories of these 4 individuals, not because they were saints, not because they were perfect, but because they lived by principles that we can clearly recognize as Unitarian Universalist principles today. Because their prophetic voices still have deep relevance for us today. Because they had a positive influence on our faith, and in one case, on this very congregation. Our opening words were written by Elandria Williams, an incomparable young Unitarian Universalist leader who passed away suddenly and tragically in 2020. Elandria wrote, "We are part of the connective tissue that holds the legacy and the future of our faith. We are the children of freedom fighters, visionaries, and radical liberal theologians. We are the phoenix rising out of the ashes of the McCarthy era and the civil rights, women's, and queer liberation movements. We are the survivors and beneficiaries of youth-led and youth-focused beliefs and programming that encouraged us to be change makers, boundary pushers, and institutionalist, all at the same time. We are and will be the ministers, religious educators, congregational presidents, organizers, and social change leaders our faith has led us to be. We wear our faith as tattoos on our bodies and on our hearts, as testaments to the blood, tears, dreams, and inspirations of our community ancestors and our elders. Would you please join me in Rise in Body or in Spirit, singing our opening hymn. It's number 287 in the gray hymnal, Faith of the Larger Liberty.
Faith of the larger liberty, source of the light expanding, law of the church that is to be, old bondage notwithstanding. Faith of the free, by thee we live, by all thou givest, and shall give our loyalty commanding. Heroes of faith in every age, far seeing, self-denying, wrought and increasing heritage, monarch and creed defying. Faith of the free, in thy dear name, the costly heritage we claim, the living and the dying. Faith for the people everywhere, whatever their oppression, of all who make the world more fair, living their faith's confession. Faith of the free, water of light, thy Lord, thy liberty, thy light shall be our blessed possession.
Please be seated.
Theodore Parker was born in Lexington, Massachusetts on August 24, 1810, and he died of tuberculosis in Florence, Italy at the age of 49. He was the youngest child in a large farming family, most of whom had died by the time he was 27. His mother, to whom he was very close, died when he was only 11. He responded to these tragedies by refusing to lapse into what he called the Valley of Tears, focusing instead by affirming the immortality of the soul, which became a benchmark of his theology. In 1838, at the age of 19, he walked 10 miles from Lexington to Cambridge to apply to Harvard. He was accepted, but could not afford to pay the tuition, so he studied on his own at home and only took the exams at school with his classmates. He considered a career in law, but his strong faith led him to theology. He completed his studies quickly, graduating from Harvard Divinity School in 1836. In 1837, he accepted a pastorate at West Roxbury, Massachusetts. He delivered one especially popular sermon 25 times between 1838 and 1842. In it, he argued against the popular notion that religion could be reduced to morality. He felt that the principle of morality is obedience to the law of conscience. In 1837, he also began attending meetings of the group later known as the Transcendental Club, which included Ralph Waldo Emerson. His studies and travels abroad led him to become increasingly involved with almost all of the reform movements of the time: peace, temperance, education, the condition of women, penal legislation, prison discipline, but most importantly, the issue of slavery. He wrote the scathing to a Southern slaveholder in 1848 and advocated violating the fugitive slave law of 1850. He worked with many fugitive slaves, some of whom were in his congregation, even hiding some of them in his home. While charges were brought against him for his actions, he was never imprisoned. Unitarian Universalists honor Parker as the model of a prophetic minister in the American Unitarian tradition. His first pastorate in West Roxbury was renamed Theodore Parker Unitarian Universalist Church in 1962 and retains this name today. He was a prolific writer and speaker. He made common use of the phrase, a democracy of all the people, by all the people, for all the people. And he predicted the success of the abolitionist cause this way: I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience, and from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice. This would, of course, later be rephrased a century later by Martin Luther King, Jr. Even by today's standards, I am in awe of Theodore Parker's determination and dedication. He truly lived his principles, which we can recognize today as principles of Unitarian Universalism. I can also relate to Theodore Parker on a personal level. As a small child, I was always the one who would befriend the outcast. And as a teenager in the Baptist church, I brought kids from the wrong side of the tracks to church, only to be told that they did not want their kind there. This was the beginning of my dissatisfaction with the faith of my upbringing. As a young adult, I was a hippie, and I still am. Believing strongly in love and peace, I protested against the war. I searched for a spiritual home that shared my beliefs, and was so happy to land here where I can continue my belief in love, justice, and freedom for all, and I can work to bring these things about with my wonderful connections to people in this congregation who share these beliefs and work toward them also.
I would like to share a poem by Sophia Lyon Foz that really spoke to me. Many of the past generation and many of today have found three abiding values in prayer: the quiet meditation on life, the reaching out toward the universal and the infinite, and the courageous facing of one's profoundest wishes. Let parents sense and share with their children the glory and mystery of everyday things. Let them look with sympathy upon humanity's age-long dilemmas. Let no questions be taboo. The next generation can ill afford to have the deeper values deleted from the book of life. If anyone were to ask me, do I pray, I would have to confess that I don't, because I don't know how. I remember as a child reciting the Lord's Prayer, reciting a simple grace before a meal, and the ubiquitous, now I lay me down to sleep, while I knelt before my bed. The key word here, though, is reciting, because I never thought about what the words meant, and no Sunday school teacher taught me, but I was to know them by heart. What I have learned researching the life of Sophia Lyon-Fahs is that she never would have condoned that type of teaching. She is revered among Unitarian Universalists as the dynamic innovator who revolutionized religious education by making it child-centered and incorporating modern educational precepts learned when she observed the techniques of teachers at the Horace Mann School. Fahs pioneered exposing children to the stories, myths, and legends of other cultures, and to the discoveries of science. In place of rigid lesson plans and structured learning, she introduced painting, role-playing, and creative self-expression. In place of beliefs that are divisive, exclusionary, discriminatory, and damaging, she promoted beliefs that are expansive, inclusive, and gateways to wider understanding. Sophia insisted that there is no special religious knowledge. Although single-handedly, she shifted religious education from Bible-centered to experience-centered learning, and from adult-driven to child-driven pedagogy. She was on the leading edge of developments in the field of religious education theory and practice. She believed deeply in engaging children where they lived, in the world of their daily lives, in the process of equipping them to deal with everyday problems. What a radical thought. She also sought to stimulate their sense of wonder and curiosity about life. Her approach to religious education marked a radical departure from traditional content and methods. Instead of telling children what they ought to believe, Fahs encouraged them to ponder for themselves the mysteries of the universe and human destiny. She wrote, quote, "One's faith is the philosophy of life that gathers up into one emotional whole. All the specific beliefs one holds about many kinds of things in many areas of life," end quote. I had no idea what to expect when I agreed to be a mentor for a coming-of-age teenager. Each student writes a credo, and mine was struggling with his. During our weekly discussions, he could articulate his belief in a God, even though he couldn't describe why, except that it brought him comfort. We spoke often about issues involving justice, how important it was to strive to be a good person and to respect others no matter their circumstance. What he wasn't able to say publicly, he said through the music at his piano. And without knowing it, I witnessed the fruits of Sophia Lyon-Fahs' method of teaching, religious exploration, and it was such a gift to me. Being involved in the RE program in our church exposes not only the kids to this type of learning, but those of us who didn't grow up with Unitarian principles and traditions. Perhaps if I had, who knows, I might know how to pray. No memorization required.
Thank you, Susan. And speaking of religious education, let's now join together in singing out our children and youth and teachers to their classes.
My name is Marilee Perriam. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman in my 40s wearing a t-shirt that says, "White silence is white consent." I'm a member of the First Unitarian Racial Justice Team, which is led by Rebecca Schaller. Believing in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, the Racial Justice Team facilitates opportunities for team members, First Unitarian Church members, and friends to learn about racism and white privilege and its intersectionality with social justice issues. Currently, our team is composed of white allies who understand that we must do our own internal work in order to be effective anti-racists. Our team is also committed to supporting and strengthening relationships with local communities most affected by systemic and institutional racism, which are already doing anti-racism work in our community. Speaking of which, I have flyers for 2 different events happening today in response to the killing of Tyree Nichols. And you can see me afterwards if you want information. Also, please watch the weekly newsletter and the church's website and Facebook group for information about the educational programs and opportunities we're planning to offer this year. Every Sunday, we take an offering. Since 2002, all the cash and designated checks from that offering have gone directly to external nonprofit organizations doing good work, our Change for Change partners. For the month of January, our Change for Change partner is Lillian Timber Farms. Lillian Timber Farms is an educational and sustainable farm dedicated to growing and creating organic produce and products for healthy living practices in underserved communities. Their mission is to foster and create community through teaching and learning sustainable gardening and farming practices and through project-based programming. For those of you who are in the sanctuary with us today, in just a moment we'll be passing the offering plate. And if you're watching us online, please make your gift by sending a check to First Unitarian. Just write Change for Change on the memo line, or make an online payment through our website, 1UC.org. On March 7, 1965, organizers in Selma, Alabama led 600 people on a march to Montgomery to demand full voting rights for Black citizens. Alabama state troopers met them on the edge of Selma at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and unleashed such violence that dozens of marchers were injured and hospitalized. Millions of people saw this violence on TV, and the day came to be known as Bloody Sunday. The next day, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King put the call out to ministers across the country to go to Selma and march with them across the bridge again. Unitarian minister Reverend James Reeb, living in Boston at the time, flew out that same night and marched with 2,500 people on Tuesday. They crossed the bridge, prayed, and returned back across. But later that evening, walking home from dinner, Reeb and 2 other ministers were attacked by a group of white supremacists. James Reeb died 2 days later from his injuries. The death of this white minister further outraged the country in a way that sadly the death of black citizens had not. 15,000 people went to Reeb's memorial service, and within a week, the president, moved by Reeb's death and by the life he had lived, finally sent a voting rights bill to Congress. Look at the picture of James Reeb in your order of service. I love that photo. Notice how he's right up front with Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy, holding hands with Abernathy's kids. That photo isn't the photo of someone who just showed up to a march one day, not sure what he was doing. Trust me, I've been that person standing awkwardly off to the side. This is a photo of someone who was deeply involved in a movement, who had shown up a dozen times before in many ways. He lived his life intentionally interconnected with the marginalized and oppressed, so he knew what he was doing that day was right. He marched and sang with confidence and gusto. To me, that photo represents an ideal of allyship that I will likely never live up to, but that I aspire to. Whether that allyship be about racial discrimination or any other of the many types of discrimination out there. I recently read the biography of James Reeb. As I learned about his life, 2 things stood out to me. First, what I think was Reeb's superpower: his determination and ability to relate to each person he met as a human being on a deep level. He was driven to work with whoever was suffering the most, and he always got to know them personally and deeply. When he understood people better, he understood the world better, and he was always working to understand the people he met. The second thing that stood out to me was his constant search for truth. His willingness to be uncomfortable as his understanding grew, and that he always, always acted on the truth as he understood it, even at great personal cost. James Reeb began as a strict fundamentalist and Bible literalist, and did his best to do what that called him to do. He went to seminary, learned, thought, got to know people, specifically the poor, indigent, and addicts of Philadelphia. And with much personal anguish, he stopped believing the Bible literally. It just didn't fit with what he learned to be true about the people around him. His love and acceptance and compassion for other humans led his way. Then he became a Presbyterian minister. But shortly after he was ordained, already he was outgrowing the beliefs that he had confessed to. His integrity caused him to move on from Presbyterian ministry even before he knew what he would do next. Around that time, someone gave him a book by Sophia Foz, and he found his way to becoming a Unitarian minister in Washington, D.C. After 5 years of that, he realized that his calling was to work directly with those who suffered the most. While remaining a Unitarian minister, he left his congregation to work for a Quaker organization in the poorest area of Boston. While Reeb enjoyed life and the company of others, he also seemed to always be uncomfortable, dissatisfied, because he was constantly growing and trying to figure out how to live with integrity, with the new realizations that came from knowing and loving his fellow humans. James Reeb's example inspires me to take more risks at being intentional, and sometimes awkward, about getting to know people on a deeper level. And I feel inspired to keep searching for truth, acting on it, and adjusting my actions as necessary, reassured that the process is inevitably going to be messy.
I don't have to yell. Fern Cowan Stanley was our interim minister at 2 separate times, first in the mid-1990s and then at the turn of the century. When I joined this church, Dick Allen was the minister and his beloved wife, Lois Allen, was our choir director. Dick and Lois served this congregation from 1979 to 1994, 14 years. Now, 14 years is a good long UU ministry. After any settled minister ends through retirement, after any settled ministry ends through retirement, relocation, even death, especially after a long period, it is a time of great change and angst in the church. Each member is experiencing unique upheaval. So the purpose of the interim minister is to be a calming, healing presence while the congregation takes the time to find a new minister through the search process. At the same time, the interim must perform all the regular functions of a settled minister. It's a huge job. Now, we hired Fern remotely. Back in 1994, that involved physical packets of 3 ring binders that were shipped between the church and the candidates with letters of references, bios, previous sermons, and a passport photo of the candidate. So when the time came, weeks later, for Fern to arrive, I agreed to pick her up at the airport and take her to her motel. So again, 1994, you could go to the gate of the plane then. So I'm sitting at the gate and watching people depart the plane, and there coming down the ramp was my mother. I recognized her right away, but had no way to realize by looking at that little passport photo that she looked and acted just like, not acted, but looked just like my mother. Not acted, no, let's not go there. They had the same hair. They had the same hairstyle, the same hair color. They were the same height. They were the same approximate weight. They had the same round face. They even both were smokers. My friends who knew my mom agreed it was uncanny. Now, Fern, unlike my mother, was born in 1935 in Kentucky. She was the third of 7 children. She became a wife in 1952 and had 3 children, Keith, Kay, and Sharon. She began working as a bookkeeper when her children started school. In 1977, she got a very amicable divorce and decided to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. She got a bachelor's degree in Texas, and then she graduated with her master's degree from Harvard at the age of 50. Fern's daughter Kay said that Fern chose interim ministry in the hope of guiding congregations through what could be stressful times and to help them embrace the changes. Fern demonstrated and practiced embracing change every time she moved to a new and unfamiliar city. Fern's unique gifts came in handy when she was here in April of 1995. We had just called Cynthia Johnson from Dallas to be our settled minister. After her candidating weekend, Cynthia returned to Dallas, and Fern was preparing to move somewhere else. Then came April 19th. The Murrah bombing happened. Fern was on a walkway outside the church, probably smoking a cigarette, and the force of the blast threw her to the ground. She literally picked herself up, dusted herself off, and seamlessly shepherded us through that horrible time. We lost Susan Farrell and Mary Renty that day, and a survivor in the congregation, Kathy Solofsky, we lost her to suicide 2 years later. There was outreach from UUs all over the world to receive and acknowledge. She had the wisdom to invite Cynthia to return to Oklahoma City, and they led gatherings at the church while we grieved. It took several days to find Mary's body, and the wait was excruciating. Fern handled it all gracefully and quietly. Kay told the Chicago Tribune that Fern understood the healing process and had an amazing ability to deal with grief. She had a special talent for helping people pick up the pieces and gently move on. And that she did for our church. 5 years later, Cynthia Johnson chose to retire, and guess what? Fern was able and willing to come back. In an interview for the Daily Oklahoman, she said, "Interims usually say goodbye and it's forever. I'm so glad that in this case, it's not. It really seems magical to me to have this opportunity." So she served us again from 2000 to 2001. She left us before 9/11, but I'm sure wherever she was in September of 2001, she handled the grief and trauma of her congregation like the loving, brave, diplomatic, gentle, bright woman that she was. Fern died in 2003 of smoking-related cancer, just like my mom 2 years later. She was only 68 years old. Fern deserves to be remembered because, as the president of the congregation in Chicago said when she was serving when she died, Fern was an amazing person someone who, in her warm and down-to-earth style, gave us wisdom and stability in our interim year and helped us to become even better as a congregation. In my humble opinion, if there are UU angels, Fern is one.
Would you please join me in a spirit of prayer or meditation? Spirit of life, source of love. Today our hearts are with the family of Tyree Nichols. We send prayers of healing and strength to his mother, Rovan, and stepfather, Rodney, to his siblings, his extended family, his close friends, his 4-year-old son. We pray that they may find the justice they seek and that they may know peace. We lift up Tyree's memory, a young man, the baby of his family, a FedEx employee, a skateboarder, a photographer. On the website that he created to display his photographs, there is a quote: "A good photographer must love life more than photography itself." And this is true of all fields and professions. A good reporter must love life more than social media likes. A good politician must love life more than power. A good police officer must love life more than policing. And good people must love life more than fear, more than ignorance, more than inaction, more than injustice, more than a system so deeply rooted in racism and anti-Blackness that even Black police officers are not immune to it. All good people must love life, and not some lives more than others simply because of the color of a person's skin. In the face of another tragic death, we are called to love life, including Black lives. We are called to fight for lives, including Black lives. We are called to live our own lives in a way that helps to break the structures of racial oppression and white supremacy so that not one more mother must hear her child calling for her for help as he is killed by the very people who are bound to protect us. Not one more George Floyd calling out mama. Not one more Ty Nichols calling out mom, mom, mom. Spirit of life, we are so grateful for these lives we have been given. May we use them well. May we use them for the purpose of loving and fighting for other lives, especially all those dear lives that are endangered by our systems and power structures, all those dear lives that are endangered by the forces of hatred and fear. May we recommit ourselves to the work of love and justice on tragic days, on every day. For Tyree, for George, for countless others, for ourselves, because we are not free until all are free. May it be so. Amen. Amen. I invite you to imagine a pedestal made of solid rock. It rises high above the ground, casting a large shadow. And way up at the top, there is the image of a great man. And I say man because it usually is. It seems that this statue on a pedestal is there for all time. But a day comes when the shine on that great man becomes tarnished. When we realize that he was, after all, a person, a deeply fallible person. And considering the sum total of all he did and said within his lifetime, we begin to realize that he may have been great for some people, but not so great for others. We begin to realize that while this is a person deserving of memory and honor in some areas, he is most definitely not a figure to emulate in other areas. But there he is on that solid rock pedestal. And what are we to do about that? And then there are the others, the other individuals who emerge and who also do great things, even things that are great for more people. But where are we to put their statues? There's only so much room on that pedestal, and you can't stretch stone. The problem is the pedestal. The great Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams wrote that, quote, "Revelation is continuous. Our religious tradition is a living tradition because we are always learning new truths," unquote. A people of a living tradition cannot be people of pedestals. Stone, after all, is not living. Our faith and our values are. Today we've heard the stories of 4 individuals who did great things, but who were relatively unknown. Not one of them was perfect, but all 4 of them emulated qualities that are still immediately relevant to us today. Theodore Parker was not perfect. He was raised and entrenched in a culture of white supremacy, after all, and he questioned the possibility of racial equality. But what he knew to be true, that slavery was an evil institution that could not be permitted to persist, that wasn't just something he wrote about. He acted on that truth. He helped fugitives to escape to safety. He supported abolitionists with his money, with his words, with his actions. Theodore Parker embodied the value of justice. Sophia Lyon-Fawes lived a life of transformation. She played a key role in transforming the way we think about religious education, moving away from the goal of indoctrination to the goal of inspiration. She shifted the focus from stuffing content into young minds to welcoming wisdom from those same young minds. And when I say she lived a life of transformation, I mean it. She never stopped growing and learning. Her most significant output, including over 12 books, happened after she was 60 years old. She was ordained at the age of 83. When we talk about lifelong learning, Sophia lived it. James Reeb also lived a life of justice and transformation. Through both his life and his death, he also embodied the values of equity, pluralism, and interdependence. He didn't only preach or write about justice, he didn't only show up for the occasional march. In the words of Brian Stevenson, he, quote, got proximate. Stevens writes, "To change the world, we are each going to have to find ways to get closer to people who are living on the margins of society." That is just what James Reeb did. And finally, we come to Reverend Fern Stanley. Her importance is of a different character than these three others. You will find no tapestry of faith curriculum devoted to her, no listing on the Harvard UU biography database. And yet, for this congregation, she did important things, and she did them humbly. She lived a life marked by a spirit of generosity. The current draft of Article 2 of the UUA bylaws lifts up 6 values that are key to our faith: independence, interdependence, critical difference, interdependence, equity, transformation, plurality, generosity, and justice. And these are the 6 values that linked together and are linked together through the force that functions like gravity in a way, the force of love. The 4 individuals that we've heard about today lived lives shaped around these same values, if to varying degrees: justice, transformation, interdependence, equity, pluralism, and generosity. And for all 4, their ministry, their life work, was centered around love. Despite their importance, I am not suggesting that we should place these or any other individuals upon a pedestal. We are not people of pedestals. Instead, let us hold them along with all of our ancestors in all their humanity, in all their greatness and their fallibility, in living memory. It is this way that although being dead, they live evermore. Alleluia. Please rise in body or in spirit to join me for our closing hymn, number 107, Now Sing We of the Brave of Old.
Now sing we of the brave of old, who would not sell themselves for gold, yet left us riches manifold. Of those who fought a goodly fight for liberty, for truth and right, their patient love, their chiefest might. Who when no gleam did point the way, pressed ever on by night by day, in spite of pain did ever say, Alleluia.
we extinguish our chalice flame, but not the light of love and community which burns in our hearts.
I want to let you know about 2 events being sponsored by our racial justice team. Today, after the service, everyone is invited to go have lunch at Eastside Pizza. If you would like to caravan or carpool over together, you're invited to meet up in Daniel Hall immediately after the service and figure out how to do that. Otherwise, you can just join us directly there. Eastside Pizza House, 1734 Northeast 23rd Street. There will be a special table set aside for our youth and for our young adults. And then on the 26th of February, there will be a potluck in Daniel Hall immediately after the service, and we hope you'll all put that on your calendars so you plan to stick around that day. And now, I offer you this blessing. Go in peace, go in persistence, go in power, make a difference. May it be so. Amen.